Hell as a Christian doctrine has never been merely a theological matter. It is a mirror of how we see God, humanity, and history itself. In his essay, The Logic of Hell, published in the collection God Will Be All in All, The Eschatology of Jürgen Moltmann, the German theologian states that the traditional logic of hell is not only inhumane, but also atheistic. The claim is provocative but not gratuitous. It arises from a direct confrontation with a specific interpretation of human freedom and divine love, found both in popular theology and more scholarly sectors of Western Christianity. Moltmann begins with a real problem. If God is love, how can the eternal condemnation of human beings created in his image be justified? The most common answer is the idea that God respects our freedom. According to this reasoning, God offers his love to everyone, but forces no one to accept it. Thus, whoever goes to hell does so by free choice. This is the logic Moltmann critiques. He finds it, for example, in The Mystery of Salvation, an official document of the Church of England, and in thinkers like C.S. Lewis, who said that the gates of hell are locked from the inside. Moltmann's critique is neither moralistic nor superficial. He begins by asking, who truly has the freedom to choose God? Most people throughout history never heard the gospel. Millions died in infancy. Many live with disabilities that affect their cognition or discernment. And the Jewish people, who according to Paul in Romans chapter 9 are still loved because of the patriarchs, would they all be automatically condemned? If salvation depends on a free choice, then the gospel is not good news for most of humanity. It is a sentence. To Moltmann, this is not merely a theological error. It is a scandal against the very nature of God. This criticism is not new. Already in the 5th century, Augustine debated with Pelagius about the condition of human will. Pelagius claimed that human beings could choose good by themselves. Augustine responded that because of sin, our will is enslaved and must be freed by grace. By accusing the logic of hell of being Pelagian, Moltmann places it opposite the Reformation tradition, which held that even faith is a gift from God. If that is so, how can salvation be said to depend on each person's autonomous decision? Moltmann takes it a step further. He calls this logic atheistic, because it places the human being as the absolute sovereign of their eternal destiny, making God a passive agent, a spectator of history. At its core, he says, this resembles the philosophies of Feuerbach, Marx, and Nietzsche more than the Christian faith. In practice, it is the human being who saves or condemns themselves. God merely stamps the decision. This extreme autonomy, argues Moltmann, is precisely the modern definition of atheism, a world without need for God. Furthermore, he questions what happens to creation. In Genesis, God sees all that he has made and calls it very good. But the theology of hell seems to assume that most of creation, humanity, and the cosmos will be discarded. Where then does the promise of a new heaven and a new earth from Revelation 21 fit in? If everything that exists today ends in destruction and punishment, God's creative project seems like a failure. Moltmann's alternative goes through the cross. In his theology, hell is not a geographic place or a spiritual prison. It is the abandonment experienced by Christ at Golgotha. When Jesus cries out, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" he descends into the deepest human condition of separation from God. Moltmann revives the ancient doctrine of Christ's descent into hell, 1 Peter 3:19, but gives it an existential and Christ-centered interpretation. Hell, he says, is where God has been, not where God sends others. There is where divine love is revealed, descending to the lowest point to redeem what seemed beyond redemption. This reading sharply contrasts with the visions that dominate the Western Christian imagination, influenced by Dante, Jonathan Edwards, and medieval infernal imagery. For Moltmann, these depictions resemble Hiroshima and Auschwitz more than the judgment of God revealed in Christ. Hell, as a place of eternal torment, turns God into a partner in violence. The biblical alternative, according to him, is to see divine justice as restorative, not merely punitive. It is worth remembering that the Bible speaks of hell in diverse and often symbolic ways. The most common term in the Old Testament is Sheol, a place of shadows, not torment. In the New Testament, Jesus speaks of Gehenna, the garbage valley in Jerusalem, as a metaphor for divine judgment. Revelation mentions the lake of fire, but in clearly apocalyptic and symbolic contexts. The Christian tradition has never had firm consensus on the nature of hell. What occurred was a cultural crystallization, not a universal dogma. Throughout church history, there have always been dissenting voices. Origen in the 3rd century defended apokatastasis, or the final reconciliation of all things. Gregory of Nyssa spoke of a purifying judgment. Isaac the Syrian said that hell is God's love rejected, not a torture inflicted by him. Even Thomas Aquinas, though he accepted hell, acknowledged the mystery of divine justice. And Luther, in his more existential moments, distrusted any theology that claimed certainty about someone's eternal destiny. It is important to note that Moltmann is not a universalist by principle. He does not say that all will be saved. What he rejects is a doctrine of condemnation based on absolute free will, as if God were limited by our choices. For him, the gospel is not a threat, but a promise. Grace is not one possibility among others, but a reality that transforms. Salvation is not a bargain, but a new creation. There are, of course, other theological traditions that have tried to reconcile divine sovereignty and human responsibility. Molinism, for example, proposes that God knows all the free decisions people would make in any given circumstance, called middle knowledge. Thus, God would choose to create a world in which the elect are freely saved. But in the end, this is just a more sophisticated version of the same logic Moltmann rejects. It still depends on human performance, not divine initiative. Reformed theology, especially in its Calvinist branch, teaches that God predestines people to salvation or perdition before the creation of the world. This view, while rejecting free will as the cause of condemnation, faces another dilemma. If God predestines some to perdition, how can he be fully good? Some contemporary Calvinists try to soften this by proposing a universal predestination to salvation, but this is not the traditional view. Moltmann's reflection compels us to return to the center of the Christian faith, the crucified Christ. He does not build his theology of hell on philosophical concepts, but on the very God who became man and died abandoned. This is the high point of Revelation. If we want to talk about judgment, we must start with the cross. If we want to talk about hell, we must ask what it means that Christ descended into it. The logic of hell based on human free will is, according to Moltmann, a betrayal of the gospel. It turns faith into a commercial choice, salvation into a personal achievement, and God's judgment into a caricature of human justice. Instead, we are called to believe that God will not abandon his creation. As Paul says in Romans 11, God has bound everyone over to disobedience so that he may have mercy on them all. The great question in the end is not whether hell exists, but what it reveals about God. Is it merely the absence of God or the place where God arrives in love? Is it punishment or redemption? Is hell the end of the story or a passage toward life? These are the questions Moltmann invites us to ask, not for speculation, but to better understand what we truly believe when we say that God is love. If hell is atheistic, as Moltmann says, perhaps we should ask, what has been more influential in our theology, the cross of Christ or the shadows of fear? What does your faith say about God? Share this video, subscribe to the Creer para Comprender channel, and turn on notifications. See you in the next video.